There's a brutal truth that almost no one dares to admit. Most people aren't betrayed because of a lack of intelligence, but because of an excess of emotional naivete. From a young age, they've been taught that kindness solves everything, that dialogue heals any relationship, and that being a good person naturally attracts good people. But reality doesn't work that way. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he realized that decisions based on true human nature always win over comfortable illusions. Because while some people enter your life seeking genuine connection, others enter silently studying your weaknesses. And the most dangerous part, they rarely seem dangerous at first. Many arrive smiling, helping, listening to your problems, and offering support precisely when you are most vulnerable. Until one day, you realize you were feeding someone who was observing you as a psychological game. And perhaps the worst feeling isn't the betrayal itself, but discovering that the signs were always there. The problem is that ordinary people react emotionally when they discover manipulation. They explode, beg for explanations, try to convince the traitor of their own pain, or engage in a desperate war to clean up their image. But the powerful do things differently. They understand something that completely changes the human game. Whoever controls emotions controls the invisible battlefield. That's why in this video, you'll understand how silent strategists neutralize manipulators without wasting energy, without begging for respect, and without falling into emotional traps. You'll learn why empathy alone doesn't protect anyone, how to use strategic silence against provocations, why toxic people hate emotionally unpredictable individuals, and what psychological method makes manipulators lose interest in you. Because in the end, eliminating traitors doesn't mean destroying people. It means destroying the access they had to your mind. And once someone learns this, they never see human relationships the same way again. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. There's a silent naivete in many good people, believing that every human being acts according to the same moral principles as they do. And that's precisely where the problem begins. Toxic people don't operate on the logic of empathy, reciprocity, or a clear conscience. They operate out of self-interest, control, and emotional advantage. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he said that politics guided by reality, not ideals, is what separates the naive from the strategists. While some people enter a conversation to build something, others enter to gauge weaknesses. While you try to resolve a conflict, they try to win the invisible game behind it. And the most dangerous part, many of them don't seem aggressive at first. On the contrary, they use an appearance of virtue, play the victim, demonstrate calculated fragility, and create the image of someone misunderstood. That's where many people fall, because they try to heal the manipulator with kindness, when in reality, the manipulator interprets excessive kindness as a lack of defense. It's not about being cruel, it's about understanding real human nature without romanticizing intentions. A wise man quickly recognizes when someone uses guilt, silence, indirectness, or emotional blackmail as a tool for control. And when he realizes this, he stops reacting emotionally because he understands that some conflicts don't stem from genuine pain. They stem from a need for control. The problem is that toxic people rarely reveal themselves explicitly. They test limits little by little, like someone checking the water temperature before getting in. First a veiled joke, then a sincere criticism, then a small provocation just to observe your reaction. And if they realize you're trying to keep the peace at all costs, they go further. It's the famous better to be feared than loved applied to human relationships, but in a distorted and manipulative way. Often, the toxic person doesn't want your success, your happiness, or your growth. They want predictability. They want to know exactly how to push your emotional buttons. That's why some people get irritated when you start to change, when you become quieter, when you stop explaining everything, when you stop begging for understanding, because their game depends on your constant emotional reaction. Think of that colleague who makes passive-aggressive comments in meetings, but then says, "Oh, it was just a joke." Or that relative who always downplays your achievements using false concern as a mask. This isn't an accident. It's a calculated use of emotional power. And those who don't understand this end up living in a psychological war without realizing it. But there's an even deeper mistake that keeps many people trapped in this cycle. The mistake of believing that the other person has the same awareness as you. One of the most dangerous traps in human relationships is believing that the other person thinks as you think, feels as you feel, and carries the same moral boundaries as you. This mistake destroys friendships, marriages, partnerships, and even entire careers. Because most honest people look at the manipulator through their own hearts. They imagine, "I would never do that to someone, so that person wouldn't do it to me either." And it is precisely at this point that emotional blindness is born. Machiavelli understood that decisions based on real human nature are always safer than decisions based on hope. The manipulator doesn't need to hate you to use you. Sometimes they just see people as emotional tools, and this scares those who still believe that everyone has a guilty conscience after hurting someone. Some people sleep peacefully after lying, betraying, or manipulating. Not because they are movie monsters, but because they have learned to rationalize everything for their own benefit. The end justifies the means becomes a silent philosophy within them. And while you try to understand the reason for the attack, they are already thinking about the next move. It's hard to accept this, but liberating too. Because the moment someone stops projecting their kindness onto others, they begin to see signs they previously ignored completely. That's why toxic people manage to manipulate intelligent individuals for so long. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's an excess of emotional projection. The victim believes that dialogue solves everything, that sincerity begets sincerity, and that transparency creates automatic trust. But the manipulator sees transparency as a map. The more you explain your fears, insecurities, and dreams to the wrong person, the more ammunition you unknowingly give them. Think about how many times someone has used something intimate you shared during a vulnerable moment, and months later transformed it into a disguised attack. The person remembers exactly where you are sensitive, exactly where it hurts, because they were observing, not connecting. There's a brutal difference between someone who listens to understand and someone who listens to catalog weaknesses. And those who master human relationships understand this early on. Virtù and fortuna don't just mean courage and opportunity in politics. They also mean knowing how to interpret people before they interpret you. A strategic man learns to observe patterns, not promises. He learns that character isn't measured by pretty words, but by the silent repetition of behaviors. Because in the end, those who manipulate rarely reveal their intentions directly. It almost always leaves small traces, traces that can only be perceived by those who learn the power of strategic silence. Few things destabilize a toxic person more than someone who doesn't react as expected. Because manipulators thrive on emotional responses. They provoke to gauge control. They make snide comments to elicit irritation. They create tension to see if they still have access to your emotional state. And when they realize they can no longer generate a reaction, they begin to lose power. This is where Machiavellian silence comes in. Not the silence of fear, insecurity, or submission, but calculated silence. Cold, strategic. Machiavelli understood that the calculated use of force doesn't always involve direct confrontation. Sometimes the greatest control lies precisely in the absence of a response. Imagine a discussion where someone tries to provoke you publicly, expecting justifications, explanations, or emotional outbursts, and receives only a neutral look followed by a change of subject. This breaks the manipulator's mental script because they expected access to your emotions. Toxic people need to feel they can affect you. When they can't, they start to get restless. It's almost funny to watch this happen. Some escalate the provocation. Others try to regain attention using feigned concern. Some pretend nothing happened, but all feel the impact of strategic indifference, because whoever controls their own reaction controls the invisible environment of the interaction. The problem is that many people confuse maturity with the need to answer everything. They want to over-explain, over-justify, over-convince. But not every provocation deserves an audience. A strategist understands that there are battles created solely to drain emotional energy, and engaging in them is exactly what the manipulator wants. Think about that work environment where someone makes subtle jokes trying to belittle you in front of others. The mistake most people make is reacting immediately, trying to retaliate or defend themselves. The wise person does differently. They reduce emotional expressions, respond briefly, almost monotonously, and let the discomfort fall on the aggressor's lap. This creates a strange feeling of psychological emptiness. The manipulator begins to realize that their blows no longer penetrate. Better to be feared than loved often simply means not being emotionally accessible to just anyone. And curiously, the less you try to prove strength, the stronger you seem. Because truly dangerous people rarely need to shout. They control presence, timing, and silence. And there's an even more powerful detail in all this. When someone stops delivering predictable reactions, they begin to become impossible to read emotionally. There's a reason why manipulators tire of some people quickly while remaining obsessed with others for years. It's not because they found someone stronger, it's because they found someone emotionally impossible to map. The Grey Rock method works exactly like that. The idea is simple, but extremely powerful. Become emotionally uninteresting to those who thrive on provoking, controlling, and extracting reactions. Toxic people function like psychological hunters. They observe changes in the tone of your voice, the sparkle in your eyes, the speed of your response, the topics that most affect you. The more emotion you demonstrate, the more material they give away. And here's the uncomfortable part. Many people think manipulation only happens in major conflicts, when in reality, it happens in the small details of everyday life. A seemingly innocent question, a criticism in a joking tone, a comment made unintentionally. The manipulator collects emotional data all the time. Machiavelli said that decisions based on real human nature require cold observation of reality. And the reality is that some people don't want connection. They want emotional access. That's why Grey Rock is so effective. You dramatically reduce the psychological reward of the interaction. Short answers, little emotional expression, little personal information, little energy available, like a grey stone in the corner of the room. No shine, no reaction, no fuel for the psychological game, but there's an important detail that almost no one understands about this method. It's not passivity, it's strategy. Many people confuse emotional neutrality with weakness, when in fact it can be a sophisticated form of protection. Think of that relative who always tries to start political discussions just to create chaos at the lunch table. Or that colleague who loves to provoke small insecurities to watch you justify yourself. The mistake is trying to win their emotional game on the ground they control. The strategist changes the terrain. They respond in a boring way. Maybe. I understand. Interesting. Perhaps. Without sarcasm, without aggression, without visible emotion. This creates a curious phenomenon. The manipulator begins to feel emotional hunger because they can no longer read you. And when someone can't predict your reaction, they lose some of the psychological control they had. It's constant adaptability working in practice. Not every conflict needs direct confrontation. Some only need a strategic absence of energy. And ironically, the more emotionally predictable someone is, the easier it becomes to manipulate them. That's why great strategists learn early on to hide not only weaknesses, but also excessive emotional transparency. After all, there are people who turn any intimate detail into future ammunition. And that's exactly where an even more surgical skill comes in. Strategic ambiguity. One of the biggest modern illusions is believing that absolute transparency creates protection. In practice, it often creates vulnerability. Toxic people love individuals who talk too much about themselves, about their plans, fears, insecurities, relationships, financial difficulties, future dreams, because all emotional information can be reused later. Sometimes as criticism, sometimes as subtle psychological blackmail, sometimes as silent sabotage. Machiavelli understood something that few people accept today. Those who completely reveal their minds give too much power to others. This doesn't mean living paranoid or distrusting everyone. It simply means understanding that not everyone deserves unrestricted access to your inner life. The manipulator observes patterns, observes needs, observes hidden desires, and then adapts their behavior precisely to maintain influence over you. Some people feign support just to find out where you are emotionally vulnerable. Others ask seemingly innocent questions just to understand which subjects can destabilize you. And the more predictable you become, the easier it is to be controlled. Strategic ambiguity breaks this mechanism. You learn to respond without revealing too much. Learn to speak without completely revealing your intentions. Learn that selective silence is also emotional intelligence, because in the end, an appearance of virtue isn't used only by manipulators. Wise people also learn to control what they show to the world. Imagine someone who announces all their next steps before they even happen. The new project, the relationship, the money coming in, the professional goal. It seems innocent, but this often sparks envy, silent competition, and emotional sabotage. There are people who smile at your achievements while internally hoping for your failure. And this isn't pessimism, it's an observation of real human nature. A strategist learns to let certain victories happen quietly. They learn that excessive exposure attracts the wrong energy, unnecessary pressure, and people only interested in what they can extract. Virtù and fortuna also involve knowing when to speak and when to disappear from the emotional radar of others. Look at great entrepreneurs, political leaders, or influential figures. Many of them rarely reveal the complete plan before execution, because they understand that information is power, and poorly managed power becomes fragility. The curious thing is that toxic people feel uncomfortable around ambiguous individuals because they can't easily predict emotions, intentions, or future moves. This generates insecurity in them, After all, manipulators depend on clear emotional maps to operate, and when you learn to limit access to your inner life, you begin to notice something almost magical. Conflicts diminish, provocations lose their power, and certain people simply walk away. But there is an even more refined technique for dealing with direct attacks without engaging in emotional warfare. A technique where you appear to agree, but in reality, you diffuse the conflict without surrendering. There's a silent art to disarming toxic people without direct confrontation. Most people believe there are only two options when faced with provocation: attack back or desperately defend yourself. But ancient strategists understood a much more powerful third way: absorbing the impact without offering emotional resistance. Verbal judo, also known as fogging, works exactly like that. Instead of reacting with anger or trying to convince the aggressor they're wrong, you use partial, neutral agreement that dissolves the tension before it builds. It sounds simple, but psychologically it's devastating for the manipulator, because they expect resistance, they expect justifications, they expect emotion. Imagine someone saying sarcastically, "Wow, you've been acting strange lately." The common reaction would be, "I haven't been acting strange at all." But the strategist replies, "Maybe a little." And that's it. The attack instantly loses its force. There's no emotional struggle to fuel. There's no open door for lengthy discussion. Machiavelli deeply understood the calculated use of force, and that includes understanding that not every battle needs to be won with verbal blows. Some are overcome by the absence of friction, like water diverting around a rock. Toxic people often create conflicts just to drain emotional energy and regain a sense of control. When they find someone who doesn't play their game, they get lost. It's almost like trying to punch smoke. The most interesting thing about this technique is that it protects your mental energy without forcing you to prove anything to anyone. Because those who constantly try to explain themselves to everyone end up emotionally exhausted. Think of that provocative boss who says, "You never seem fully prepared." The emotionally reactive individual immediately goes on the defensive, tries to list results, justify effort, prove competence. The strategist calmly responds, "There's always room for improvement," and ends it there, without submission, without confrontation, without emotional fuel. This creates a strange feeling in the manipulator, because they can't find the friction point they wanted to exploit. Better to be feared than loved often simply means conveying absolute emotional control in the face of chaos. And curiously, the less someone can affect you, the more silent respect begins to emerge around you. Because emotionally unpredictable people are difficult to control. That's why wise individuals don't engage in endless debates trying to clean up their image all the time. They understand that some criticisms are emotional traps disguised as conversation. And here's something even deeper. When you learn not to feed into the manipulator's psychological game, your emotional absence begins to produce even stronger effects than your presence. There's a silent moment in every toxic relationship where the manipulator realizes they're losing emotional access to the victim. And almost always, this moment begins with something simple: absence. Not dramatic absence, full of emotional farewells and final speeches, but cold absence, gradual, strategic. Toxic people depend on constant proximity to maintain psychological influence. They need to observe your emotions, monitor your reactions, test limits, and provoke small instabilities to continue exerting control. When you reduce access, you reduce power. Machiavelli deeply understood the logic of scarcity. Something excessively available loses value, predictability creates weakness, and constant exposure gives emotional dominance to the other side. That's why some people start to despair when they realize you no longer respond with the same speed, no longer share everything, no longer seek validation or explain every decision. The manipulator senses the distance even before it's declared, because the psychological game begins to die without emotional nourishment. Think about how many relationships survive only through the repetition of conflicts, demands, and artificial reconciliations. There's no love there. There's emotional dependence masked as connection. And when someone silently interrupts this cycle, the entire dynamic collapses. The toxic person starts escalating provocations, creating dramas, or even faking sudden changes just to regain emotional access. Because losing control hurts them more than losing the person themselves. The most powerful aspect of strategic absence is that it reveals who truly valued you and who only valued the influence they had over you. Some people never truly missed you. They missed the access, the constant attention, the emotional predictability you offered. It's hard to realize this, but extremely liberating. The wise person understands that not every presence deserves continuity. Sometimes, the greatest demonstration of strength is simply disappearing from the emotional field where constant warfare once existed, without announcement, without childish revenge, without needing to convince anyone, just a strategic retreat. Virtù and Fortuna also appear in this rare ability to abandon environments that drain your mind before they destroy your identity. Look at how many people remain in toxic relationships simply because they are afraid of seeming cold, selfish, or difficult. Meanwhile, the manipulator continues to use guilt as a tool for emotional imprisonment. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, means understanding that some connections weren't made to be healed. They were made to be ended. And curiously, when you cease to be emotionally available, certain masks begin to fall on their own. People who once seemed kind begin to show irritation. Understanding people start acting with hostility, because absence has a brutal effect. It forces others to show who they really are when they can no longer control you. And sometimes, the most dangerous revelation happens precisely when the manipulator tries to attack publicly to regain lost power. There's a type of manipulator who never attacks directly. They prefer the territory of ambiguity. They make offensive jokes disguised as humor. They make passive-aggressive comments in public. They use irony to humiliate without seeming aggressive. Because that way, they can hurt you while maintaining an appearance of virtue in front of others. And that's exactly why so many people feel powerless in these situations. If they react emotionally, they seem exaggerated. If they remain silent, they silently accept the humiliation. But strategists understand something fundamental. Some people only operate in the shadows because they depend on them. Spotlight acts like surgical light on disguised toxic behaviors. Instead of attacking emotionally, you calmly expose the behavior in front of everyone, without shouting, without losing control, just making visible what was previously hidden behind, "It was a joke." Imagine someone saying sarcastically in a group, "Wow, he always does everything wrong." The common emotional reaction would be to retaliate aggressively or pretend not to hear. The strategist looks calmly and asks, "Did you notice that almost all your jokes about me involve attempts to belittle me?" That's it. The atmosphere changes instantly. Because now the behavior has been brought into direct focus. Toxic people hate public awareness of their psychological games. They depend on emotional turmoil and social doubt to operate comfortably. The most interesting thing is that spotlight doesn't need to be aggressive to be devastating. In fact, the calmer you are, the stronger the psychological impact. Because the manipulator expects emotional chaos, not lucidity. Machiavelli understood that the calculated use of force often works better when it appears as absolute control rather than an impulsive outburst. And here lies an uncomfortable truth. Toxic people often choose victims who are afraid of social embarrassment. People who are too polite, too peaceful, too worried about not seeming rude. The manipulator knows this. That's why they provoke subtly. But when someone learns to expose patterns without losing emotional elegance, the game changes completely. Think of that colleague who constantly interrupts you in meetings with sarcasm. Instead of arguing, the strategist calmly says, "You tend to interrupt a lot when you disagree with someone. Is there a specific reason for that?" It seems simple, but it creates enormous psychological pressure, because now everyone sees the behavior. And when the toxic dynamic ceases to be invisible, the manipulator loses some control. Better to be feared than loved also means conveying that certain attacks will not go unnoticed. And curiously, many manipulators back down not when they encounter aggressive people, but when they encounter emotionally strong and socially lucid people. However, there are environments where toxicity doesn't depend solely on verbal provocations. It depends on something even more dangerous, distorting narratives, denying facts, and transforming lies into tools of power. And in these cases, emotional memory isn't enough. Something much colder is needed, much more strategic. One of the greatest advantages of toxic people is realizing that most people live only in their emotional memory. They lie knowing that few people record facts. They deny conversations, knowing that almost no one keeps evidence. They distort situations because they understand that confused emotion weakens credibility. And that's exactly why toxic environments, especially at work, become so dangerous. The professional manipulator rarely explodes in an obvious way. They operate in gray areas. They give orders verbally and then deny them. They make informal promises and then say you misunderstood. They create small traps of interpretation to maintain narrative control over events. Machiavelli deeply understood that information is power, and whoever controls the narrative often controls the final outcome. That's why strategic people document everything, not out of paranoia, but out of intelligence. And here, there is an important difference. Documenting doesn't mean living in a state of war. It means reducing the space for future manipulation. And curiously, toxic people become extremely uncomfortable around individuals who are emotionally and documentarily organized, because lies survive better in nebulous environments. Think of that manager who constantly changes his story depending on what suits him at any given moment. The emotionally driven employee reacts by arguing, trying to persuade, appealing to memory. The strategist sends a simple email, just confirming the alignment for today's meeting. That's it. The emotional field becomes the factual field. And manipulators hate recorded facts. The most powerful aspect of strategic documentation is that it silently dismantles gaslighting. Gaslighting is when someone tries to make you doubt your own perception, memory, or emotional sanity. Phrases like, "that never happened," "you're exaggerating," "that's not what I said," are classic tools of psychological control. And emotionally vulnerable people begin to constantly question themselves after months of experiencing this. But records completely change the dynamic. Screenshots, emails, messages, reports, objective notes after important meetings. All of this drastically reduces the manipulator's power. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, means understanding that good intentions don't protect anyone from distorted narratives. Entire companies have destroyed careers because someone more skilled controlled the social perception of the facts. And here lies a brutal truth. Many people lose battles not because they are wrong, but because they are strategically unprepared. A wise man understands that trust does not exclude caution. He learns to protect his reputation before it is attacked. Learn that an appearance of virtue is often used by extremely manipulative individuals to seem impeccable to others, while silently sabotaging them behind the scenes. And when they realize they can no longer control the facts, many manipulators resort to the oldest weapon of human nature, destroying the person's image in the eyes of the group. There comes a point when the manipulator realizes they've lost direct emotional access to you. And when that happens, many resort to their last available option, trying to destroy your reputation. Because toxic people understand something very old about human nature. Groups influence perceptions faster than facts. That's why smear campaigns almost always begin subtly. Ambiguous comments, insinuations, false concerns, half-told stories. The manipulator rarely says directly that you're bad. They plant emotional doubts in others. They make it seem like they're just trying to help or concerned about you, an appearance of virtue again functioning as a strategic mask. Machiavelli understood that reputation is invisible power, and whoever controls social perception often influences alliances, opportunities, and collective trust. But here's the mistake most people make: reacting desperately, trying to clean up their own image for everyone at once. This almost never works, because the more emotionally defensive a person seems, the more fuel they provide for the toxic narrative to continue living. The strategist understands that a solid reputation isn't rebuilt through panic. It's rebuilt through quiet consistency. Intelligent people observe patterns over time, and manipulators often make a fatal mistake. They exaggerate. They invent too much. They create contradictions, because sustaining lies requires constant energy. The wise man doesn't rush into every room trying to convince everyone of his innocence. He observes who truly matters. He observes who seeks facts and who merely consumes emotional gossip for entertainment. Being feared rather than loved often means conveying absolute serenity while the other person loses control, trying to destroy you. Think of that work environment where someone starts spreading rumors that you're difficult, cold, or arrogant simply because you stopped accepting silent manipulation. The emotionally reactive person tries even harder to please. The strategist does things differently, maintains composure, professionalism, documentation, and behavioral consistency over time. Because they understand that true reputation is built through the silent repetition of actions, not the desperate need for immediate approval. Virtù and fortuna also appear in the ability to survive socially without begging for collective acceptance. And there's something curious about smear campaigns. They often reveal more about the aggressor than the victim. Emotionally mature people perceive obsession, exaggeration, and resentment hidden behind the narrative. But to see this, time is needed, and time requires composure. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, means accepting that not everyone will believe you immediately. And that's okay. Because strategic maturity also means understanding that some social battles don't need to be won publicly. They simply need to be survived intelligently until the other person's mask falls off on its own. And when that happens, the most dangerous and liberating moment of all arrives, definitively leaving the emotional game without declaring war. Few things confuse a toxic person more than someone who simply disappears from the game without making a scene, because the manipulator expects drama, expects a final confrontation, expects long messages, tears, threats, or desperate attempts to solve everything. This feeds their ego. It gives them a sense of importance and control. But the Machiavellian exit works differently: silent, cold, definitive. Machiavelli understood that some wars shouldn't end with explosions, but with a strategic retreat. The wise man understands the exact moment when insisting on a relationship starts to cost more than abandoning it. And here lies a brutal truth. Many people aren't in love with the manipulator. They're addicted to the hope of finally being understood by them. That's what keeps so many people trapped in toxic cycles for years. They keep trying to explain their own pain to someone who already perfectly understands that pain and simply doesn't care. When this awareness arrives, something changes internally. The person stops seeking emotional validation in the wrong place, stops trying to win impossible arguments, stop trying to show the toxic person everything they've lost, and begin to disappear emotionally even before you disappear physically. Responses dwindle, explanations vanish, invitations are refused. Emotional access is gradually closed off, like a kingdom withdrawing resources before the final siege. The most powerful aspect of the Machiavellian exit strategy is that it doesn't seek visible revenge, it seeks freedom, because whoever still wants to destroy the emotionally manipulative person remains, in a way, bound to them. The strategist doesn't leave to prove superiority, they leave to recover mental peace, energy, and identity. Think about that relationship where every conversation turned into psychological strain, where you needed to measure your words, predict reactions, and manage the other person's emotions all the time. That's not connection, it's emotional survival, and nobody thrives living permanently in a state of defense. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, means accepting that some people will never change because their behavior works perfectly for their objectives. The end justifies the means in their minds, and expecting profound transformation without real consequences is often just emotional self-deception. That's why strategic men rarely announce dramatic breakups. They simply reduce access, reorganize priorities, and move on without fanfare. Because they understand something few understand. Those who over-explain their departure are still seeking emotional permission to leave. Better to be feared than loved sometimes simply means demonstrating that your absence is irreversible. And interestingly, it's at this moment that many manipulators fall into genuine despair because they realize they've lost something rare, someone who remained emotionally available despite all the strain. But there's an even higher level than simply leaving, thriving so much after leaving that your silent evolution becomes the ultimate answer to everything they tried to destroy in you. The greatest victory over a toxic person isn't destroying them. It's becoming emotionally unreachable for them. Because the manipulator expects two things after losing control over someone, either eternal suffering or continuous obsession. They expect you to keep looking back, dwelling on betrayals, planning imaginary responses in the shower, and trying to prove your worth to someone who never wanted to see your true value. But there's a level of evolution that completely dismantles this cycle: strategic apathy. Not that depressive, lifeless, emotionless apathy, but the mature indifference of someone who has finally understood that some people no longer deserve mental space in their own life. Machiavelli understood that real power lies not in destroying enemies emotionally, but in building a reality where they cease to matter. And that's deeply uncomfortable for manipulators. Because while hatred still exists, connection still exists. The opposite of love isn't anger, it's indifference. Think about how many toxic people are disturbed when they realize you've truly moved on. Not superficially, but internally. When you no longer react to attacks, stop following their lives, stop trying to justify yourself, and don't feel the need to theatrically close cycles, it destroys the sense of importance they believed they had over you. Because deep down, many manipulators can't stand losing emotional relevance in someone's mind, and that's exactly where their silent rise begins. The most interesting thing is that thriving after toxicity completely changes your perception of strength. Before, you believed strength was enduring everything without complaining. Afterward, you understand that true strength is carefully selecting who deserves access to your time, energy, and emotions. Virtù and Fortuna appear in this silent reconstruction of your own identity. You start sleeping better, thinking more clearly, creating without constant fear of judgment, building projects without needing to explain every step, and you realize something almost frightening. A good part of your exhaustion was never emotional weakness. It was prolonged coexistence with psychologically draining environments. Toxic people make you live in a permanent state of invisible tension, like an emotional soldier always waiting for the next attack. And when that ends, the mind finally breathes. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, means understanding that not every war is worth eternal permanence on the battlefield. Some victories happen when you simply rise so much mentally, emotionally, and spiritually that certain conflicts cease to reach you. The strategist doesn't live trying to convince the world of their own greatness. They grow in silence until the results speak for themselves. Better to be feared than loved often simply means conveying a silent truth. Those who have survived manipulation have learned to see true human nature and will never again be emotionally naive in the same way. Ultimately, the biggest trap set by toxic people was never the manipulation itself. It was making you believe you needed to keep playing their game. And perhaps that's the most important turning point of all. Understanding that maturity isn't about silently tolerating everything. It's about recognizing when someone is draining your mind, sabotaging your peace, and turning your kindness into a tool for control. Machiavelli understood that surviving in the world requires more than just heart. It requires perception. It requires strategy. It requires the courage to see people as they truly are, not as you wish they were. Because as long as you continue to treat manipulators with emotional naivete, you will continue to give them access to the only thing they truly want: your reaction. Now the question is, how many people still have too much emotional access to your life? Who today can control your mood with a simple provocation? Who still occupies mental space in your head even without deserving it? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, how many times have you called something love, friendship, or loyalty when it was actually just disguised emotional dependence? Because the moment you learn to observe patterns, control emotions, and limit access to your mind, something changes forever. You cease to be someone easy to manipulate, and toxic people sense this immediately. So write in the comments, what was the most difficult toxic behavior to identify in your life? And which of these strategies opened your eyes the most today? I want to read about your experience, because sometimes a single realization completely changes how someone views human relationships for the rest of their life. And if you want to continue learning about power, human nature, psychological manipulation, emotional strategy, and Machiavelli's deepest teachings, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Because while most continue living emotionally on autopilot, few are learning to see the invisible game behind people.